7 o'clock.
All right, we're going to call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order. Could the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman Thibodeau? Here. Alderman GOV is here. Alderman Moran?
Here.
Alderwoman Timmons?
Here.
Alderman Clemmons?
Here.
Mayor Donches?
Here.
Me too.
And Alderman Clay.
Yeah, she's got me not in the
I have you,
but
okay, yep. I will move you.
Now, the first item is public comment regarding any items on tonight's agenda. I don't see anyone, so we will go forward with the presentation regarding the annual audit.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. John Griffin, CFO. Thank you for allotting some time to us to review the fiscal '23 annual audit, or known as the ACFR, and also some intelligence on the governance letter as well as the single audit federal awards. To my immediate right is Mr. Scott McIntyre, principal at Markham, and to his right, Rose Evans, who's the comptroller of the city of Nashua. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. McIntyre. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and good evening to members of the committee. I appreciate the invitation to come in tonight and walk through the results of our audit of your financial statements for the year ended 6/30/23. I was here back in October, I believe it was, with 6/30/22. As I said that night, with a couple of new accounting standards, the things fell behind a little bit, but I think I think the city and us are back on track. Very happy to be here, certainly before June 30th of 24, discussing our June 30, 23 results. So I have seen the agenda online. There are 3 documents that John talked about. One we call the governance letter. The second one is what I would call the single audit report, required by federal regulations. And the third and final document is the ACFR, or the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. That's the largest of them. If you have hard copies of them, great. I will refer to each of these documents. If you're following along on a tablet or other computer, I will give you the PDF page number of the document. I think the whole agenda was over 200 pages. I'll give you the PDF page number of that. The first report I'd like to talk about is what we call our governance letter, and it would be in the agenda package, page 5. If you have hard copies, this would be on our letterhead, and it would begin by saying we audited the financial statements, and then the next bold paragraph starts with our responsibility under United States generally accepted auditing standards. So we call this the governance letter because this is required communication. And when I say required, our professional auditing standards is promulgated by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. They require us to report to the language in the standard is those charged with governance. So maybe it's a little slang, but in the audit world, we refer to this as the governance letter because this is the communication that we are required to make to those charged with governance. It's a really important communication. I mean, when we look, we'll get to your ACFR, and those are your financial statements. I don't think there's going to be any surprises in there, but really the governance letter tells you the results of the audit, and that's probably the most important communication you can hear from me tonight is this letter. Probably much more so than talking about fund balance or budget to actual results. I think the committee is probably very much aware of those key account balances. So if I start with this governance letter, as I said, it tells you what we did. We audited the different financial statements in here. It talks about our responsibility under United States generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards. Some of the key points underneath that are we consider the city's internal control. We do not test it. We run testing procedures, but we do not do a complete evaluation of the internal control. We do this as part of obtaining reasonable assurance that there are no material misstatements in your financial statements. Over on the second page will be PDF page 6, or just page 2 of the governance letter. There's a header that talks about our plan, scope, and timing of the audit. As outlined in our engagement letter, we identified a couple of risks, the 2 bullet items at the bottom of page 2 or PDF page 6. Those are a couple of risks that we identified in our audit of the city of Nashua. I will tell you that those same 2 risks that we identified in Nashua are identified in every single audit that's out there. That's because the standards require us to assess those 2 issues, management override of internal controls and revenue recognition. More specifically, is revenue recognized in the proper period. Those are presumed risks in any audit. So we need to design testing procedures assuming these are high risk, and that was some of the audit work that we did. Over on page 3 of the governance letter, significant audit findings. The good news here is that this is, I may talk for a few minutes about this, but there are all the findings are, there's nothing, in my opinion here, that's unusual in nature. We talk about the qualitative aspects of the accounting practices. During the year, Nashua implemented 1 new GASB. GASB is an acronym for the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. Their 96 statement for subscription-based information technology arrangements. I'm not going to get into that in a whole lot of detail unless there are questions, but you did implement this new standard. The related assets and liabilities and revenues are reflected in your statements. Again, that's statement 96. There was another standard that was evaluated by the city and our firm, and that was the GASB, again, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, their statement number 94 on public-private partnerships. We evaluated a couple of contractual arrangements here in Nashua to see if they met the definition of a public, sometimes I may refer to it as a PPP, a public-private partnership. We evaluated a couple of them, and they did not meet the definition of a PPP, and that's because the definition isn't just where there's a relationship, there has to be an exchange or exchange-like transaction. In other words, equal value is exchanged by all parties in a transaction. And we didn't think that in some of the items we looked at that there was equal value exchanged or the exchange or exchange-like transaction. Further down under the qualitative aspects of the accounting, there's a handful of bullet items there. They're listed here because, again, our professional standards require we to communicate to you the estimates that are included in your financial statements. And these are some of the largest ones here. Your net pension liability, your net OPEB liability, the related deferral accounts that go with those. Those are all actuarially determined, but nonetheless, they are based on estimates and assumed key assumptions. So, at the top of the next page, this is page 4. It would be PDF page number 9, difficulties encountered in the audit. This is one of the items I like to talk about the most. It's a very short sentence. We encountered no significant difficulties in dealing with management, performing, and completing our audit. The next paragraph is on independence. We are required, I'm sure as the committee knows, to be independent of the city. And further, professional standards require require us to communicate with you any non-audit services that we perform. And we do one in particular, and that is we assist in the preparation of the ACFR, which is the document we'll get into in just a few minutes. It is all based on the underlying general ledger and other accounting records that the city has, but we do assist in the preparation of the report. As far as I know, there are about 3 governments in all of New England that prepare their own ACFR. It's very common in the New England states where the audit firms assist governments in pulling the financial statements together. Again, we're just required to disclose that to you. So, disagreements with management, there were none, and that really concludes the governance letter. Again, I think it's the most important communication. If we came in here and found that the books and records were not in good working order, that would have been written up in our governance letter. If we were required to propose significant material journal entries in order for your financial statements to be materially fairly presented, this governance letter would have been several pages longer, and it would have shown you what those proposed adjusting journal entries would have been. Very pleased to be able to report to you that there were no proposed significant adjustments that were needed for your statements to be in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. I'm going to hop over to another document. I'm going to call it the single audit report. If you're following on, that would be the report you have. It's titled up, the Independent Auditor's Report Pursuant to Government Auditing Standards and Uniform Guidance. If you're following along in the PDF, it's PDF page 10 of the agenda. There are two reports in here, and again, I most oftentimes refer to this as the single audit, and that's a little bit of a, but it's not, maybe not super representative of what this is, because there are really two reports in here. One deals with the single audit, one deals with the internal control evaluation that we made. As the title says, the Independent Auditor's Report Pursuant to Government Auditing Standards. I've mentioned a couple of times tonight that we followed generally accepted auditing standards. We also followed generally accepted government auditing standards, sometimes referred to as the Yellow Book. It's still very much known as the Yellow Book. There's two different sets of standards. There are a lot of similarities. One of the key differences is that I can't go out and take continuing professional education in how to prepare a tax return, because generally accepted government auditing standards say, how does that enhance my ability to perform governmental audits? Just maybe an extreme difference, but it's always good to point that out. Again, there's two reports in here. The first one, I'm going to go over, so just past the table of contents. This tells you our evaluation of the internal control over financial reporting, as outlined on page 1 of the report, immediately following the table of contents. And for those that may be following on the PDF, it's page 12. If you look at the very bottom there, really the second to the last line on page 1, we did, during our audit, we did not identify any deficiencies in internal controls that we considered to be material weaknesses. As auditors, we evaluate any potential weakness in internal control and put them into 3 categories. One would be just a simple control deficiency. The next level up would be a significant deficiency, and the level above that is a material weakness. I'm very pleased to be able to report that based on our audit and our evaluation of the internal control system here, we did not identify any material weaknesses in the internal control structure. Going forward a couple of pages to print page 3 if you're on the print document, or PDF page 14. This is a report that we are required to prepare based on uniform guidance. Uniform guidance is put out by the Office of Management and Budget of the federal government because you are a recipient and you spend federal dollars. Because of that, you are required to prepare what is known as a CFA, S-E-F-A, or a Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards. And based on your CFA, we go through a major program determination, and we are required to select grants to be tested as part of a single audit. This report is the results of our audit of your federal programs. And if you just look at the title, after it's who it's addressed to as the Mayor and Board of Aldermen, below that is the report on compliance of each major program. You know, I think we ended up, we'll see it in a minute, but I think we ended up testing 5 federal programs during the year. Some of them were clusters, so there were actually more in there. And as you see in the paragraph that begins with, in our opinion, we basically, this is saying that we, based on our evaluation, you were in compliance with OMB's compliance supplement for federal agencies, pardon me, for organizations that receive federal dollars, that you were in compliance with all the requirements applicable to your federal grants that we tested. Below that, you see a paragraph that's titled up the basis for our opinion. I'm not going to walk into that in detail, but those are the auditing standards that we followed in order to be able to come to the conclusion that we did. I want to turn all the way over to print page 12 or PDF page 23 of the single audit report. And I just wanted to point out at the very bottom there, couple rows up from the bottom, you see a name of federal program or cluster, and on the right is the assistance listing numbers. Those 5 programs are clusters of programs: Child Nutrition Cluster, Federal Transit Grants, the Title I Grant, Special Education Grant, and the Education Stabilization, or sometimes referred to as ESSERS. Those are the 5 federal programs that the auditing standards required us to test during the year. And again, based on the test work that we did, and you can see the check marks above the assisted listing numbers there, we did not identify any material weaknesses. There were no reported significant deficiencies. There were no instances of non-compliance, and then under the federal awards, there were no material weaknesses in your internal controls over your federal awards, and no significant deficiencies were reported as well. So, all good report here on your federal programs. That takes us to the third document, which is your ACFR. If you have the print copies, it's probably the thickest one that you have. For those that may be following along with the agenda package that's online, the cover page to your ACFR begins on page 25. Following that is an introductory letter that goes on for several pages, highlighting some key activities during fiscal year 23. But I would like to take your attention over to PDF page 44 or print page 14 of the ACFR. And I'll give all members of the committee a moment to turn to that page. While I'm waiting for you to turn there, what this page represents is, this is our opinion on your financial statements. I just walked through our opinion on your internal controls systems and our opinion on our testing of your compliance with grant requirements. This is our opinion on your ACFR, or your annual comprehensive financials report. Again, it starts up with our report on the audit of the financial statements. It gives you our opinion. I just summarize it very, very succinctly. It doesn't necessarily need 2 paragraphs of words. It's a clean opinion, or unmodified opinion, without exception, that your financial statements are in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. There are 2 component units. Nashua Airport Authority and Pennachuck Waterworks are included in here. Those were audited by other auditors. We've incorporated them into your annual comprehensive financial report as required by your reporting requirements. But we are pointing out that Markham did not audit those 2 organizations. It's not an uncommon situation in the governmental world, where there are what we call a group audit situation, and there's more than one audit firm involved. At the bottom of that page, the paragraph, it begins with an italics where it says the basis of opinion. A lot of similarities with this report with the one we just went through. Again, this tells you the 2 sets of auditing standards that we followed in order to reach our conclusion. At the top of the next page, print page 15 or PDF 45, responsibilities of management of the financial statements. Important couple of paragraphs there, because everything other than the first 3 pages, I'm sorry, it actually goes on for 4 pages. Our opinion goes on for 4 pages. Everything else in this document belongs to the City of Nashua, and it ties back to the books and records of the City of Nashua. Management has responsibilities. We have responsibilities outlined there as the auditors, and there's 5 bullet items there. I'm not going to walk through each of those in general. I certainly could answer any questions that you may have on them. And at the bottom of that page, again, print page 15, it says we are required to communicate to those charged with governance. So in our opinion on the financial statements, it's telling the reader that there should be a governance letter out there that you should be looking at. That's the first of the documents that I went through, and it's really one of the most important communications. Over at the top of the next page, you have various, preparing an ACFR, you have required supplementary information, you have supplementary information, and you have other information. I could explain the differences if anyone on the committee would like me to. And at the bottom of that page 16 is other reports that are required by government auditing standards. That's telling you, as the reader of the financial statement opinion, that there's another report out there. That's the second report I just walked through, what I refer to as the single audit report on your internal control structure and your compliance with grants. And now, getting into some of the numbers. If I could turn your attention all the way over to print page 31, or it's PDF page 61. I'll refer to the print page, since I think most people seem to have print pages. Page 31 and 32 are your long-term perspective balance sheet. Technically, it's called a statement of net position. I don't really intend to spend a lot of time on this tonight. This is a long-term perspective. The key account balances are actually on page 32 in that first column of numbers, almost in the middle of the page, where you have your net pension liability and your net OPEB liability. We don't think it would be appropriate to have a conversation about any local government's financial statements without at least pointing out those two key account balances. There is a wealth of footnote disclosures in there. I'm not going to go into them in any more detail than that, other than to point out that there is some really good footnote disclosure in there, as well as some trend information in the back of your report. I'm going to skip over page 33 and 34, as those are the long-term perspective financial statements, or your statement of activities, sometimes called your statement of revenues and expenditures. And I'm going to go all the way over to print page 35 or PDF page 65 if you happen to be following on with the agenda. This is the first page that almost all readers of your financial statements will want to turn. They'll skip over the introductory letter, they'll skip over management's discussion and analysis, and most likely they'll skip over your long-term perspective financial statements. And the focus here is on this page is your governmental funds balance sheet, and the focus, generally speaking, is on the first column of numbers, or the general fund, the primary fund of the government, and they focus on the numbers in the lower left-hand corner. Again, that first column of numbers, working from the bottom up, the total fund balance is just over $103 million. Pardon me, 102. I just 102.7 in total fund balance.
We have 103.7.
I'm sorry. I should have taken my contacts out to see
Okay,
these small
it is
numbers.
103, okay, good. Okay.
I really thought about it. Or that I need stronger readers. Just forgive me for
That's
that.
okay. I was like, am I missing?
No, you're right. Above that are the different components of fund balance. And here in that fund balance section, I'm gonna go from the top down. That you have a non-spendable portion of your fund balance. Those are because some of your assets are not in a spendable form, so accounting standards require you to set those aside. You don't have any restricted money in your general fund. In your general fund, you have a committed fund balance of about $33 million, and below that, you have a signed fund balance of $33.8 million. Those are committed and assigned for particular expenditure purposes. And your footnotes on print page 85 would show you the detail of each of those numbers. But that gets us to, getting back to page 35, that first column of numbers, the third number up from the bottom, the unassigned fund balance. Again, if there's one number that most readers are going to look to first in your ACFR, it's that general fund unassigned fund balance with an account balance as of 6/30/23 of $35.1 million. You compare that to 6/30/22, and it's increased a little over $1 million. It was just on around $34 million at 6/30/22, so it's gone up about $1 million during the year. And you can look at why it's gone up based on your budget versus actual results. And if we just jump forward a couple of pages, print page 39, again, for those that may be following on the PDF, would be 69. If unassigned fund balance is the first place that most readers turn, this page here, print page 39, or your budget versus actual comparative schedule, would be the second place that most readers turn. And the focus here is almost always in that final column of numbers. And just very quickly, from top to bottom in that final column there, about a third of the way down the page, total revenues, I'm looking in the variance column. You see the total revenues came in greater than expected compared with the budget of about $10.3 million. Go further down the page, another third of the way down, expenditures and encumbrances and other carry forwards had a favorable variance of about $9.6 million. Collectively, that's almost $20 million in positive budgetary results of operation. You used about almost $5 million in fund balance, which mitigates some of that. And really, it's the net here that's dropping to increase both your unassigned fund balance, also your assigned fund balance, and your committed fund balance. So it's the budgetary results of operations that drive the changes in those fund balance categories that we talked about. Not so much your non-spendable fund balance, but your committed fund balance your assigned fund balance, and your unassigned fund balance. Essentially all increased, and it's because of the positive budgetary results of operations that you see here on this particular page. That, really, I'm gonna pause there and maybe just recap what I've tried to communicate tonight. Again, the first report that I went through, I refer to it as our governance letter. And again, that goes back to what our standards require us to do. We report to those charged with governance. I think I would look at that as, getting a good bill of health from us as your independent auditors report. We did not need to propose any significant journal entries as a result. If we did, those would have been a component of the governance letter. There were no disagreements in management. We disclosed to you those bullet items that were your key accounting estimates. I also just would recap by saying the other non-audit service that we provide was assisting in the preparation of pulling together this 200-page document. We do it for Nashua, we do it for almost all of our clients. It's a very common thing here in New England. You go outside of New England, it's a very uncommon thing, but it's inside of New England, it's very common for auditors to assist in the preparation of the financial statements. And we talked about the single audit report. There were 2 reports in there. One was on our evaluation of your internal control structure, and I think you will recall me indicating that based on our evaluation, we did not identify any material weaknesses in internal control. The second report was on our audit of, this year it happened to be 5 federal programs. It's not always 5, it's based on your total expenditures and a criteria that we have to use. That's given to us by, it's called the Uniform Guidance. It's put out by the Office of Management and Budget. We selected 5 programs to be tested. We evaluated the internal controls over those. And again, happy to report that we did not identify any material weaknesses in internal control over your federal programs, and that our compliance testing found that you complied in all direct and material respects with the 5 federal programs that we selected for testing. And the last report that we went through we just finished up was the ACFR clean audit opinion. Clean is sort of a generic term. Technically, it's called an unmodified opinion. It's the best type of an opinion you can receive on the ACFR. It's a wealth of information in there. I always feel like I have a responsibility to point out that there's a pension liability and OPEB liability. I'll take any questions that you may have on those. A wealth of footnote disclosure in there. The focus really for most readers is on the fund basis financial statements and those components of fund balance, in particular committed, assigned, and unassigned, with most of the focus, not all, but most of the focus residing with unassigned fund balance. And you saw about $1 million increase in that key account balance, really driven by your budget versus actual results. Super quick walkthrough of our audit of your financial statements and what some of the numbers mean. I've tried to be comprehensive here tonight, but I also looked at your agenda. It looked like a fairly busy agenda, so I didn't want to take up too much time, but I will try to answer any questions that the mayor.
Well, thank you, Mr. McIntyre, for your help with this, and of course, throughout the year, thank you to Mr. Griffin and Ms. Evans for all the good work you do to keep us in order. So with that, we'll go to members of the committee or alder people. Alderwoman Klee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this. I actually did read through it, and I have one silly question, I guess. On page 23 of the big book, I'll call it, in that paragraph about the third line down, it says, this reflects a $22 million decrease over fiscal year 2022. Should that be increase?
Yeah, let me take a look.
Okay.
This is page 23.
Page 23, the bottom paragraph says,
Yep.
as reflected in the above chart. It's the third sentence. I know it seems like a petty question to ask, but
I just need to turn a page here.
'cause
And this reflects a $22 million, as reflected in the above chart, the city's largest sources of revenue from property taxes, operating grants, the cost of governmental activities. No, I think that is correct, because that's not meant to be a change in fund balance or a change in net position. What that's designed to represent is Again, I didn't speak so much about the statement of activities,
Right.
which is the long-term perspective
Right.
income statement. And the design of that is to show governments are thought of as expenditure-driven organizations. So most operating statements start with revenues and subtract expenditures. Yours, on the long-term perspective, start with expenditures and subtract related revenues, come out with a net cost of providing public safety services and things like that. So when it's referencing the decrease of 22 million, it's talking about the program revenues, the total cost of operations less program revenues, before things such as property tax revenues, which are not specific to any department or function. Motor vehicle collections are not specific to any department. But looking at the net cost of providing operations before those general revenues is very often thought of as a key measure. That's why it's reported in here.
May I, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, of course,
Okay,
go
I
ahead.
guess the question that I'm having is that you reference the cost of all governmental activities this year was 356 million. This reflects 22 million decrease over the fiscal year 22 total of 334 million. That's why I asked whether or not that should have been in the word increase. It talks about 356 million from fiscal year 23, and it says a decrease over the fiscal year. So are you saying that this 22 million is that we had $22 million less in program revenue from the previous year?
Man, I apologize. Now that I read this and listen to you again, I think that sentence should say
Increase.
an increase.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Apologize for that.
That's okay. Thank you.
Great catch.
All right, any
Told you
other
I'd go back.
questions? Alderman Moran.
Thank you. Could you just go into more detail on how you found that the public-private partnerships are an equal exchange? And if they are lopsided, which side are they favoring, government or the private sector?
I can go into the first part of that. I can't offer an opinion. That would be for somebody else to measure. But the definition of in accounting standards, whether it's a couple of years, just last year you implemented the lease standard. Even though you may have a contract that says lease right on it, if it's not an exchange or exchange-like transaction, it doesn't meet the GASB definition of a lease. So you can have a contract that says a lease on it, but it doesn't meet GASB's definition of a lease. The same concept applies to public-private partnerships or PPPs. You can have something that has the look and feel of that, but if it does not have that exchange or exchange-like transaction associated with it, it doesn't meet the technical definition. And based on our review of the ones that we looked at, including the Performing Arts Center, in our opinion, the opinion of management is that there was not an equal exchange of value. So because of that, it did not meet the definition of, again, it was statement 94, and is not required to be reflected. The transaction is not fully required to be present in your annual comprehensive financial report.
All right. Do you have a follow-up? Yeah,
And,
go ahead.
Of all the ones that you evaluated, where would they be in the book?
The ones we evaluated, they're not in here at all, because they didn't meet the definition, so they wouldn't be reflected in your accounting statements.
Follow-up.
Yeah.
Could you forward the board the ones that you did look at and that didn't meet the criteria, just so we are aware which ones didn't?
Sure.
Thank you.
I think Mr. Cummings wanted to add something.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tim Cummings, Director of Administrative Services. I actually was going to speak, if I was allowed, on the exact same topic that was just raised by Alderman Moran, because I just want to make sure it's clear, or clarify if we could. If I'm understanding the issue at hand, it sounds as though we may, and maybe this is inaccurate, we may colloquially refer to something as a public-private partnership, and that wouldn't be inaccurate. What you're saying is though from this lens or this perspective, it didn't rise to the level of being defined as a public-private partnership in this instance, but we do have, and I've referred to them over time, here in the city, public-private partnerships. An example would be Moynihan Manor, where Moynihan Manor, the city of Nashua, looked at that and said we wanted to enter into a certain type of tax arrangement because in exchange for that, we were getting a certain level of affordable housing. And it is a low-income housing tax credit project, and sometimes we refer to that as a public-private partnership because the state, the federal government, and in this case, the local municipality are all coming together, working with a private sector developer to achieve affordable housing. And so that is a true definition of a public-private partnership, but maybe in this instance, it wouldn't necessarily rise from a GASB standard as a public-private partnership. If I'm inaccurate in that, please let us know, because I think we've heard me, in particular, over time, use it in that way. Thank you.
In fact, if I may, Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I think what he was indicating is very accurate, and that's why I started to answer your question with the GASB definition of a lease. We see contracts all the time that say lease all over them, but they do not meet GASB's definition of a lease. And the same thing applies in this particular case. It may have all the appearances of a public-private partnership, but if it doesn't meet GASB's definition, it's really no different than the lease situation.
Alderman Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Director Cummings. I can definitely understand that there's no accounting tool to assess the social impacts of the benefits that we receive from such projects that might not be reflected in the financial aspect. Thank you.
All right, any other questions, comments? I don't see anything. All right, well, thank you very much, and I assume we'll see you back next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go to the remainder of the regular agenda. First is a communication from John Griffin and Rose Evans regarding attaching all this information. If there's no objection, we'll accept that communication and place it on file. Next item is a communication from Amy Gerard, Purchasing Manager, Alderman Govea.
In regard to financial audit services in the amount not to exceed $281,000 funded from 53114 Accounting and Audited Services. I'm going to make a motion to accept, place on file, and approve entering a 2-year contract for external audit services with Marcom LLP in the amount not to exceed $281,000. Funding will be through Department 126 Financial Services, 168 Solid Waste, and 169 Wastewater. Fund 126 Financial Services, $202,320. 168 Solid Waste, $30,910, and 169 Wastewater, $47,770.
I think that might break a record for the longest motion we've heard in a long time. Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. John Griffin, CFO. We are, Ms. Evans and I are confident that the acquisition of Melanson by Markham provides many benefits to the city of Nashua in their expanded scope and capabilities. We think a 2-year contract is a good length. We're comforted that several of the employees of the former Melanson are still with Markham. We continue to get unmodified opinions, and due to the hard work of Ms. Evans and her team and others throughout the city, especially we wanted to call our attention to the single audit. There's a lot of good financial oversight and work being done on our federal grants that we get, very important component. We'd recommend the 2-year contract. This is a critical document as we go forward through the bonding process. I know it's hard to comprehend some of these numbers, but the Standard & Poor's rating agency, Fitch, Moody's, they're all experts at looking at these financial statements, and we're comforted that we're in compliance with the GASB, all of the pronouncements they've had. So it's Ms. Evans and my recommendation that you award the 2-year agreement with Markham. Thank you.
Questions or comments? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next
Thank you.
communication from Amy Gerard, Purchasing Manager, Alderman Govea.
In regard to wastewater chemical, sodium hydrochlorite in the amount not to exceed 330,000 funded from 61156 chemicals. I'm going to make a motion to accept, place on file, and approve the FY25 purchase of chemical sodium hydrochlorite from Univar USA Incorporated in the amount of 330,000. Funding will be through Department 169 wastewater fund 61156 chemicals.
And we have Mr. Boucher on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dave Boucher, wastewater superintendent. This is for the FY5 purchase of sodium hypochlorite. It's a chemical used at wastewater treatment facility for disinfection before the process is discharged to the Merrimack. We also use it in our odor control system at the wastewater plant, and we also use it for disinfection at a satellite facility, screening and disinfection facility. Last year, this year, we participated in the Northeast Merrimack Valley Chemical Consortium, their process, in order to receive the lowest rate. And this year, Univar was the low bidder. It's a company we've worked with in the past, and a good service. We'd like to continue to use them. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Next communication from Amy Gerard, Purchasing Manager, Alderman Govea.
In regard to wastewater chemical sodium bisulfite in the amount of 92,000 funded from 61156 chemicals. I'm going to make a motion to accept, place on file, and approve the FY25 purchase of the chemical sodium bisulfite from JCI Jones Chemical in the amount of 92,000. Funding will be through Department 169 wastewater fund 61156 chemicals.
Mr. Boucher?
Dave Boucher, wastewater superintendent. Again, this is for the FY25 purchase. Sodium bisulfite is a chemical wastewater facility and also at our satellite screening and disinfection facility off Bridge Street. It's used to remove chlorine from the wastewater process before it's discharged to the river for permit reasons. Again, we participated in that Northeast Merrimack Chemical Consortium bid process to get the lowest rate. And this year, JCI Jones was the low bidder. We'd like to continue to use them. Be happy to answer any questions.
Anyone? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Next communication from Amy Gerard, Purchasing Manager, Alderman Govea.
In regard to wastewater chemical polymer in the amount of 730,000 funded from 61156 chemicals. I'm going to make a motion to accept, place on file, and approve the FY25 purchase of polymer from Polydyne in the amount of 730,000. Funding will be through Department 169 wastewater fund 61156 chemicals.
Dave Boucher, wastewater superintendent. Polymer is a chemical we use to help and aid of drying our sludge before it's moved off site at the wastewater plant. This has gone through the consortium. Unfortunately, polymer, everybody sells a different type of polymer chemical. So we have companies come and test their chemical against our product. So far, Polydyne has had the best polymer chemimal. They kept their rate, so this would be the FY25 purchase of the chemical at the same rate as last fiscal year. Be happy to answer any questions.
All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Next communication from Amy Gerard, Purchasing Manager, Alderman
In
Govea.
regard to construction administration services in the amount of 4,000 funded from 53107 architect and engineering services / Riverfront TIF fund. I'm going to make a motion to accept, place on file, and approve a contract for construction administration services related to the Nashua Downtown Riverfront Implementation Project, Renaissance Park Pavilion with Park McDowell in the amount of 4,000. Funding will be through Department 183 Economic Development Fund 53107 Architect and Engineering Services / Riverfront TIF fund bond.
Ms. Hannum?
Liz Hannum, Economic Development Director. This is for the final design of the pavilion that will go in Renaissance Park. So we have a generic design right now, and we're getting full schematics through this contract.
Any questions, comments? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next, communication from Amy Gerard, Purchasing Manager, Alderman Govea.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In regard to change order number 2 for construction services in the amount of $22,405, funded from 54210 Construction Services / Riverfront TIF Fund Bond. I'm going to make a motion to accept, place on file, and approve contract change number 2 for the downtown Nashville Riverfront Cotton Mill Transfer Bridge ADA project to address miscellaneous changes in the work related to contaminated soils and groundwater, crushed gravel backfill, tampered steel washers, and replace an existing drain line in poor condition with Ed Sweat. Incorporated in the amount of $22,405. Funding will be through Department 183 Economic Development Fund 54210 Construction Services / Riverfront TIF Fund Bond.
Now, that was the longest.
You think that breaks it? I
I
don't
think
know.
that breaks the record, yes.
I thought the other one was longer. Yes, Ms. Hannum.
Liz Hannum, Economic Development Director. It was pretty self-explanatory, but this is for the cotton mill side, the north side of the bridge. They had some issues that came up during construction.
This is the ramp, yeah. Any questions, comments? Alderwoman Clee.
Thank you. It's just kind of a question, and I know you put it in an email to one of my constituents, but do we have any idea for the public that are listening as to about when this bridge we think will be completed, as well as the project itself with the Renaissance Park?
Yes, so the full build will be done spring of 2025. And the bridge portion should be done much sooner than that. So we're looking at about 3 to 4 weeks at this point to finish out the bridge portion, or the ramp portion. But it will not be accessible because they'll be working on that side, doing the boardwalks. So it'll still be under construction in that area.
Just a follow-up?
Yes.
So basically what you're saying is that it'll be completed, but we can't get to it. Does that mean that we can't get to it until the project is completed next spring, or until like the fall? Because I think the truth is people can go down across the Main Street Bridge, but I know there was,
Yeah.
that's why we did this.
It will likely be fairly close to that springtime. But I think we'll probably be done with the boardwalks on that side a little bit sooner, but I don't want to commit to any time frame.
Understand. Thank
Yeah.
you.
All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next, communication from Amy Gerard, Purchasing Manager, Alderman Govea.
In regard to contract for closed caption transcriptions in the amount of $25,266, funded from 81100 Capital Improvements. I'm going to make a motion to accept, place on file, and award a multi-year contract for closed caption transcription with Televue Corporation in the amount of $25,266. Funding will be through Department 124 PEG Access Channel Fund 81100 Capital Improvements.
Okay. Jeff Painter, PEG Manager. This is the first of 3 requests we're going to have tonight. Excuse me, the FCC has mandated that closed captioning be part of our broadcast. They're not going to enforce this for 2 years, but we want to get ahead of the curve. Number one, just to service the citizens here that require this. But this will be part of our larger system that are the next 2 items on the agenda. Excuse me. This will be for hardware that will be needed for closed caption, but also for the closed captioning itself. It's kind of like it was hard to understand in the beginning, but it's like a gas card. You buy so many hours, so many thousands of hours of closed captioning, and we're not really sure how much we're going to need. So we bought several thousand hours of it, and then we'll have to see in the next year, what our requirements of closed captioning are. So if there's any questions.
Alderwoman Clee.
Two things. So what you're telling us is the less we speak, the less it'll cost us.
Yeah,
Just saying it. So this, you said, is going to be part of the next two, the cloud and the equipment?
Yes,
It's all
this
part of
will
that,
be part of the system that we're asking
just
for
a
tonight.
component of it. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Next communication from Amy Gerard, Purchasing Manager, Alderman Govea.
In regard to contract for Telvu Care Support in the amount of $38,156.35, funded from 81100 Capital Improvements. I'm going to make a motion to accept, place on file, and award a 5-year contract for cloud service with Telvu Corporation in the amount of $38,156.35. Funding will be through Department 124 PEG Access Channel Fund 81100 Capital Improvements.
Okay, this will be the actual care, the bumper-to-bumper customer service that we'll receive from Telview for the next 5 years. So we'll be totally covered for everything that we're asking for. The next item is going to be the excuse me, the actual equipment upgrade. So this will be the service that goes with it.
All right, anyone? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Next communication from Amy Gerard, Purchasing Manager, Alderman Govea.
In regard to equipment and software upgrades in the amount of $36,449.50, funded from 81100 Capital Improvements, I'm going to make a motion to accept, place on file, and approve the purchase of equipment and software upgrade with Telvu Corporation in the amount of $36,449.50. Funding will be through Department 124 PEG Access Channel Fund 81100 Capital Improvements.
All right, this is the actual system, I mean, that we're going to go with. We've had Telview over the last 7 years. It's worked excellently for us. And this, this is the heart and soul of everything we do, because this is, where you schedule, you broadcast live, you record, you archive. This will give us, I think, was it 10 terabytes, Pete?
20 terabytes, we have 10 now.
10 now, yeah, of storage, so, because we really need storage. So this is really the heart and soul of everything. I mean, without this, we wouldn't be able to do any of this.
Anyone? Anybody? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Well,
Thank
thank you
you.
very much. Next communication from Amy Gerard, Purchasing Manager, Alderman Govea.
In regard to housing opportunities for person with AIDS, HOPLA, in the amount of $1,486,130, funded from 55699 other contracted services / grant fund, housing opportunities for people with AIDS. I'm going to make a motion to accept, place on file, and approve a contract for the administration of HOPLA, housing opportunities for persons with AIDS, pass-through grant for tenant-based rentals assistance with Harbor Homes Incorporated in the amount of $1,486,130. Funding will be through Department 171 Community Services, Fund 55699, other contracted services / grant funds, housing opportunities for people with AIDS.
Mr. Mack?
Good evening. Bob Mack, Welfare Officer for the City of Nashua. This will be year 19, 20, and 21 of the city managing this pass-through grant opportunity in partnership with Harbor Homes. It used to be Harbor Homes and the Southern New Hampshire HIV and AIDS Task Force, and when they combined, it's now a contract with Harbor Homes. This will provide tenant-based rental assistance for 30 to 35 households per year with at least one household member who has HIV or AIDS. It will also provide supportive services, including case management, counseling services, linkage to medical treatment and services, also permanent housing placement opportunities as far as security deposits, utility connection fees, and inspections of housing units. And the city also gets an administrative fee of about $45,000.
All right. Anybody have any questions, comments? Alderman Moran.
How much is actually expended for the rental vouchers?
The tenant-based rental assistance is $1,076,465 over that 3-year period.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you very
I'm in
much.
opposition.
Yes.
I'm in opposition.
Oh, okay, a no vote?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, motion passes. The record will reflect that.
Yep.
Next communication from Amy Gerard, Purchasing Manager.
In regard to animal impoundment and quarantine services in the amount of $99,081 funded from 56214 Humane Society Animal Control / Grant Fund. I'm going to make a motion to accept, place on file, and approve a renewal contract for shelter, pond isolation, and quarantine services with the Humane Society of Greater Nashua in the amount of $99,081. Funding will be through Department 171 Community Services, Fund 56214, Humane Society Animal Control / General Fund.
Ms. Bagley.
Good evening, Bobby Bagley, Director of the Division of Public Health and Community Services and Chief Public Health Official. The Humane Society for Greater Nashua has been providing services for their shelter, their pound isolation, and quarantine services for the city for over 22 years. Our Division of Public Health and Community Services, as well as Environmental Health, and our National Police Department Animal Control Officer work very closely with the Humane Society to oversee this contract and the deliverables that are outlined here. This contract will go into effect for July 1st through June 30th of 2025. And the amount of $99,081 will be paid out to the Humane Society. The services that have been provided thus far have included providing shelter and pound for dogs, cats, guinea pigs, rabbits, a couple of chickens and roosters. They do a really good job of making sure that, for the most part, most animals are returned to home or either adopted. There's been very few animals euthanized through our Humane Society, and we look to renew this contract for an additional year.
Alderwoman Clee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Bagley, is this about the same that we've been doing about the same cost every year?
Yes, it has been the same
They've
amount.
been pretty
Yes.
flatlining us, which is great. Thank you.
Anyone else? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next communication from Amy Gerard, Purchasing Manager. Alderman Gobea.
In regard to Amendment 4 for Transit Contract Agreement in the amount of $687,720 plus variable cost, funded from 55690 Regular Transportation Services. I'm going to make a motion to accept, place on file, and approve Amendment 4 for Compensatio of First Transit in the amount of $687,720 plus variable cost. Funding will be through Department 186 Transportation Fund 55690 Regular Transportation Services.
Mr. Sullivan.
Good evening, committee members. Mr. Mayor, Matt Sullivan, Community Development Director, here on behalf of this request to extend the city's existing 5-year contract with its transit services provider, First Transit or Transdev. Just as by way of quick background, the city had a 5-year contract with our provider. They've been with us actually for several decades now, although we've done competitive bidding in each cycle. We have an option under that current 5-year contract to extend up to 3 years on an annual basis. This represents the first year of extension, meaning it's the 6th year of the contract that could ultimately extend beyond that. I do want to just clarify that the way in which this is represented both in the memorandum and on the agenda is it requires a little bit of explanation. When it says that this is the amount of $687,720 plus variable costs, that's not representative of an increase in that much from year 5 to year 6. In fact, this represents an increase of approximately $100,000 over a contract that's about 2.7. And really, it's representative of a 2.5% increase of our variable rate, which means drivers driving the buses and vans, and then a 6% increase to our fixed costs. The reason for the fixed cost increase is that we're actually adding, again, on the private contractor side, we're adding an additional dispatcher and trainer in response to some recent opportunities for improvement, particularly related to the intersection of buses and pedestrians and buses and bicyclists. So the contractor is responding to concerns that we've had, and therefore they're adding staff capacity, hence the 6% increase in the contract costs. Beyond that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, but encouraged and excited to move forward with another year with our current contractor.
Alderman Govea.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess the one question I have is about the variable cost. What did that look like in the last 5 years? What type of money are we talking about?
That's a great question. So we're looking at about I would say $1.9 million in variable costs, and I want to just be clear about what's included there. So that's not only the fixed route bus service that we have, meaning all of our regular fixed routes and then our north-south routes at night and our Saturday service. It also includes all the ADA and paratransit van services that we offer throughout both the city of Nashua and then the service that we provide from Nashua to surrounding communities. And so that's generally where we've been at, but as the name implies, variable costs change. One such example being that when services were actually cut over about 1.5 years ago, some folks may remember we had driver issues, our variable costs decreased because it's billed on an hourly basis. And so it's very much it depends how large the system or small the system is that we're running. That's what controls that variable cost rate. Also a component of that I should just point out is that it depends on what fleet is deployed. Depending upon the type of fleet and the size of the fleet, we're charged a higher or lower variable cost because the driver is necessary to drive that piece of equipment. The requirements change essentially. So there's a lot of factors in there, but our estimation is that moving into the new year, that's about, I would say, $2 million in total cost based on where we're at today.
Alderwoman Clee.
Thank you. I actually have two questions. The first one is, I remember the 1.5 years that we had to kind of almost shut down service because we couldn't get people, and we had to do an amendment to the contract to give extra money so that they would pay more to their drivers, or at least in hopes that they would pay more to their drivers and so on. Do we need to continue doing that, or are they at the point now where they're being able to sustain the drivers and so on?
So I made a promise at that time, and fortunately that promise was accurate, and that is that at least for the time being, that was a one-time response to the COVID pandemic and the inflation associated with it that I think was felt across all industries. We needed to make that drastic step at that time. Things have stabilized now where we're at, so there's still increases in costs, particularly on sort of the some of the more fixed costs that we have, but Alderwoman Clee, there's no need in the immediate future to take a drastic step up. I will just take this opportunity to say that that's part of our hesitance about potentially going to a new contractor, although we'll have to cross that bridge at some point. We recognize that the market has changed substantially outside of our relationship with this contractor, and inflation will play a major role in what those rates might be.
My second question, if I may. Thank you. So the other question is, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, that I've had constituents that say, we have buses that only have 2 or 3 people in it. I assume that you monitor all the buses, hence the need to stop one stop and so on. Do you monitor and say, look, we're only getting 2 passengers on this. We have a stop that's not too far, so we're going to either stop the stop or maybe modify the entire route.
That's a great question, and it's a really complicated answer that I'm feeling a moment of deja vu that I may have answered this 1.5 years ago, but we are constantly monitoring that. What we tend to try to do, and this actually came out of our amendment about 1.5 years ago, is that we tend to deploy vans on routes that are lower ridership. To name a couple, the Route 7, the Route 12, those are going to the more rural section, lower ridership areas of the community. We typically deploy vans because there are less emissions from those in some ways, and of course there's less capacity, and so there's no need to have a large bus going out there and putting wear and tear on our fleet. That said, we do have some anomalous times. I'll tell you, for example, over the last couple days when it's been really, really hot, you might think that we'd have a lot of ridership for people trying to stay cool on the buses. A huge component of our ridership are senior citizens. And so they're not venturing out in the heat, and so ridership has been really low over the last few days. So you may have some of those 3 to 4 people on a bus at any given time. But we do generally try to align the equipment being deployed with the people that ride that route, but there are occasionally mismatches.
May I just quick follow-up? My quick follow-up is, my concern about sometimes going down to a smaller van or something like that is you may have people with mobility issues that might have a wheelchair or something, where the bigger vehicles, you know, the bigger buses would be able to handle the capacity of those. So you're aware of that type of thing?
Yep, and you make a great point that if we have someone with an ADA accommodation getting on board, all of our vehicles can accommodate that, but to your point, on a smaller vehicle, that does significantly limit the capacity. So that's why we're really careful, particularly when we know that someone's going to be boarding with a wheelchair, that we might then only have 4 other seats available on the van. So we tend to limit. That's why you see so many buses out there and so few vans. We typically need a bus if we're going to have 7 to 8 people riding. You need that next piece of equipment up. Luckily, our buses are on the smaller end. They're not the large buses or the ones that you see, sort of the large pivoted
Tandem,
ones in
yeah.
buses, and cities rather. But we try to run the smallest equipment possible to optimize the ridership.
Thank you.
Alderman Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was telling my colleague in Ward 6 last week a little story about I had to have my car fixed at Ford up on Amherst Street, and let's just say my wife forgot she had to pick me up. So I walked about 1.5 miles, 2 miles down Amherst Street, which walkability of that street is a whole separate conversation, to my office. And I noticed a bus stop not very well taken care of. I don't even know if it's in use. And this refreshed my memory to ask you about it. It's right in front of Building 19.
Yeah.
And there's no crosswalk. There's really nowhere for anyone to go. And it's the bus stop, the bench, not like maintained grass-wise or whatnot,
Yeah.
and then nothing around it, like no sidewalk, no anything. Is that something that's in use? I assume it must have been popular at one point when Building 19 was active, but.
It was certainly more popular. A couple just things to keep in mind. We actually have a capital project that we've received funding for of last year's escrow process to upgrade several of those bus stops. But frankly, my response to what you're saying is more that Amherst Street suffers from a litany of other challenges that it's dealing with, including the lack of pedestrian access. And so Amherst Street stops, other than those that are contained safely within plazas or other areas, are not frequently used. That said, Amherst Street is one of our highest ridership routes, particularly to the Walmart destination. And so that stop is not as frequently used. It needs some TLC. But we're also having a conversation about whether or not some of those, because we can really only have so many stops that need to be maintained and shoveled out during the winter. We're having active conversations about whether some of those fixed stops should be moved to another location, because to your point, some are not. It needs change over time, I guess is what I would say, and so perhaps we need that stop maybe more to the west on Amherst Street than where it is right now.
Thank you for humoring me.
Yeah, of course.
Anybody else? Alderwoman Timmons.
Thank you, if I may. This is to my colleague to the right. You passed my house. You should call me.
Nice.
You did, and I bypass that bus stop all the time. I never see anybody there,
Okay.
so, yeah.
I have.
Next time.
Now
call
I
me.
know.
That's it.
All right, anyone? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
We have the next communication is from Dan Healy, City Clerk, regarding emergency PO request. If there are no objections, we'll accept this communication and place it on file. Next, we have a communication from Amy Gerard, Purchasing Manager. Alderman Govea.
In regard to FY25 bus vehicle supplies in the amount not to exceed $45,000 funded from 61799 vehicle parts and supplies, I'm going to make a motion to remove from the table a communication from Amy Gerard, Purchasing Manager, relative to the FY25 bus vehicle supplies in the amount greater than $25,000 funded from 61799 vehicle parts and supplies.
Mr. Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
no, aren't we on fiscal year bus supplies in the amount not to exceed $45,000?
$45,000.
Yeah, we need to take the motion because we tabled it at the.
We have to take it off the table first.
Well, I thought the tabled was a separate item.
It's a bit interesting the way it was structured on the agenda.
Yeah.
They are the same item, in fact.
Oh, they are the same item, all right.
The amount has changed in a way based on the discussion at
All
the
right.
last meeting.
Is there a motion to, did you make the motion? to
Yes,
take
I
it from
made
the
the
table?
to remove from the table.
All right, does anybody object to that? No? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. All right, we're
So
now,
now we'll make
now we go back to Alderman Govea.
and I'll make I will now make the motion to accept, place on file, and approve the purchase for various parts for Billig Bus Fleet with Gillig LLC in the amount not to exceed $45,000. Funding will be through Department 186 Transportation, Fund 61799, Vehicle Parts and Supplies.
All right,
Is that
Amend.
changed?
I think we
point of
need to
order.
amend.
Point of order.
yes. Alderman
Technically,
Clemens.
that should be an amendment.
Yeah,
I was thinking the same exact thing.
yeah.
Yeah, so
So
I
I'll
would
move to,
amend, as you said.
So the motion has been amended to make it an amendment.
Well, first
The
we take it off
motion on the
table.
floor is to amend.
The motion on
correct.
the floor is to
To
amend.
amend from 45 to 25, right?
From 25 to 45.
From 25 to 45, okay.
From, in an amount greater than 25 to not to exceed 45.
Correct.
All right. Alderman Sullivan, or excuse me, Mr. Sullivan.
Yes, John Sullivan here. I should have taken what everyone was giving me at the last Finance Committee meeting. I think there was a recommendation. I believe there was a recommendation for this to be $50,000, and in fact, I went back and consulted with the team, and in fact, we believe we need a maximum of $45,000, but we have clarified that, so this is a not to exceed of 45 for replacement parks for the Gillig buses. Thank you.
All right, so the motion on the floor
to amend. Yep.
is the motion to amend. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. So now we have the main motion, which is to approve the item
As amended.
as amended in an amount not to exceed $45,000.
That's correct.
Alderman Clemens.
Yeah, I just want to, your ballpark figure was very, very accurate, so good job. And thank you for coming back with
Yeah,
with
of course.
a smaller amount too,
Yep.
because it shows you, and not that you don't, and the fact that you do, I appreciate that. This is always the case with you, and so I think it's great, but it shows that you really put the time and the thought into it to come back 5,000 less, so thank you for that, and I'm sure our taxpayers appreciate that as well.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. New business resolutions and ordinances, we have none. Record of expenditures, Alderman Govea.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that the Finance Committee has compiled with city charter and ordinances pertaining to the record of expenditures for the period from May 31, 2024 to June 13, 2024.
All right, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. General discussion, any general discussion? Public comment, any member of the public wish to address the Finance Committee? Remarks by Alderman. Any remarks by Alderman? Alderwoman Clee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this time, I'd like to motion to adjourn.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes and the meeting of the Finance Committee is adjourned at 8:13 PM.